Hello and welcome back to IrishRacing.com's Jump To It show, where in this show we're going to look ahead to the Derby meeting at Epsom and 3 races in particular where we've got some strong and maybe some interesting form lines and views to look at and pick apart going into the big races in a couple of weeks' time. So joining me on the show this week are Ed Quigley and Stephen Harris. So Stephen, I'll start with you first of all. Great to have you back on the show. Hope you had some good time away.
Yeah, nice to have a rest, Joe. Although, as we were saying off air, you don't really have a break now, do you? I'd spend the whole time trying to watch dodgy streams of horse racing and trying to sort of VPN into the back of Betfair to have a bet. But no, it was nice to have a rest. And we had a cracking week of racing at York, of course.
Absolutely. And Ed, I'll bring you in as well now just to talk quickly about York. So kind of the standout performances for you.
Oh, it was brilliant, wasn't it? It really was exciting. I really got into it. That's the phrase I'm probably looking for. Yeah, I mean, naturally, your big performers, your star performers in the big races were the ones which really grabbed the headlines. I mean, Emily Upjohn totally took the field apart, didn't she, in the Musadora? I didn't really see which way she went. I think it was about 100 yards, and she put 4 lengths on them. That was really impressive, especially for one so inexperienced. And then similar kind of theme with Desert Crown in the Dante, I suppose. Again, another horse who come from a Nottingham maiden, was taking on Group 1 winners. You're never quite sure where you are with them. And again, under Richard Kingscote, which again, it's a big year for Richard Kingscote, incidentally, which is another kind of side point. But yeah, Desert Crown took the field apart. I mean, Sir Michael Stout was absolutely buzzing in the aftermath, and he'll head to the Derby now, where he's generally a 2-to-1 shot. So those were the two. For sentimentalists, obviously the old boy Stradivarius, who I thought was either heading to the Albert Bartlett Novices Hurdle next season or retiring. Well, he's come back, and I mean, he was all hands and heels. Fairly, I mean, it was a brilliant performance. John Gosden beforehand was saying, look, I think I've only got him 80%. He desperately needs the run. He was a huge drifter in the market. I mean, I think his SP was 6-4 in the end. He was odds on at one stage. And I mean, he won as if he was a 4-year-old. So now they're probably, thinking Ascot Gold Cup and one more run before retiring him. But it's great to see the old boy back. I mean, it's brilliant. We say it, don't we? That that's what makes the jumps season appealing, is the reappearance of those stars year after year. To have Stradivarius back again, clearly in fine fettle. Amazing, really. Brilliant training performance. And yeah, he was the romantic story of the week.
And speaking of an old boy back, we mentioned that Stephen's now back from vacation. But Stephen, Stradivarius for you for the Ascot Gold Cup, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, he's an amazing advert for John and Thady Gosden, isn't he? Because as someone on Twitter said, he's the best dodge we've ever had, because he's certainly got a few quirks. He goes on and off the bridle now, but he's got that sort of half furlong burst of speed that none of the other stayers can live with in that division. Then he idles, pulls himself up, ends up winning narrowly. John Gosden's always said, and I think he's right, that he's best on good fast ground. And they had a bit of a shower, didn't they, before that day of racing at York? And maybe it was a little bit loose for him, ideally. I mean, he's won on heavy ground, he's won on every type of ground, but he has got that burst of speed. And I suspect he's one of those horses, Joe, that the bookmakers are always keen to take on. He's got an amazing strike rate, but he's never really got into that realms where he's been an unbackable price. I mean, they all wanted to lay him. He was 6-4, bigger on the exchanges before the York race, and he duly did the business again. I mean, the tragedy is, Ed and I have always said, he really should be running in a champion hurdle and be another Istabraq, shouldn't he? He'd have been a top-class hurdler. He'd have been a sort of banker at Cheltenham every year if they'd gone down that route. Obviously, that's just fantasy, but he really is a good advert for... I mean, those of us who prefer the jumps to the flat, mainly is because you don't get the longevity of these horses, and Stradivarius is the one horse who's bucked that trend over the last 5 years or so.
And Stephen, for you as well, any other eye catchers from the York meeting?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, horses for courses, York, they come back every time and win there. It's a unique place. I would be slightly worried about wide margin winners. We've got 2 short price favourites now for the Oaks and the Derby. We're going to talk about later on, but York is one of those places where horses can end up winning by 10 lengths and they're all unconscious a long way out in behind it. It's a baffling track occasionally, especially when they get a bit of rain on the surface. And sometimes horses who win by a long way there are a bit flattered and might not repeat the form at a totally different track. But it's something to bear in mind going forwards.
Well, this leads us in nicely then to the first race that we're going to talk about. So the Coronation Cup, of course, over the same distance and the same course, of course, at Epsom as the Oaks and the Derby. But what kind of form lines do we need to really be paying attention to when it comes to the Coronation Cup? I mean, Ed, I'll start with you here. We're expecting a small field, aren't we?
Yeah, usually it's the case. This is obviously your race for the Derby and Oaks combined for the older horses, isn't it, really? And which is probably the place to start with. Adayar is generally a market leader for this last season's Derby winner. Things didn't quite go to plan after the Derby. I mean, he ran a cracker in the Arc, I thought, it has to be said, and then couldn't back it up on Champions Day, but that was only a fortnight after a really hard race in France on that occasion. But look, he's the Derby winner. He's got a bid in hand on official figures. And then you've got the globe-trotting Pyledriver, who's been wonderful for connections. And of course, let's not forget, won this race last year when mugging Al Arzi in the closing stages, or rather, maybe Al Arzi mugged himself, I think it's fair to say. But either way, generally speaking, this field cuts up to quite a small amount. Aidan O'Brien often has something in it. He's got a very good record in it, unsurprisingly. I think, St. Nicholas Abbey, Yates might have won it. And there's a few kind of, should we say, roll of honour horses that have done the job for him. So no doubt he'll probably throw one of his 120 plus rated older horses will somehow line up in here. But generally speaking, it's always a good contest, high quality. And if we get Adayar against Pyledriver, that'll be a really fascinating renewal. Because sometimes you can get that Derby crop, that classic generation, once they get to 4, they don't get their weight allowances and everything. Sometimes things don't quite look as good. But, depending on how revved up Adayar is, I'm sure he'll be pretty revved up for his reappearance. If that is sounds like that's where they're going to choose to see last season's Derby winner make his reappearance. And clearly, the track will hold no fears. So, it generally be a small field, but full of quality is generally the trend.
And Stephen, for you, how about looking at the form lines going into the Coronation Cup? Any kind of different views from Ed, or are you on the same line?
Well, I agree almost exactly what Ed said. Adayar won the Derby 40-1 into 16-1 on the day. Got a brilliant ride up the inside, really impressive. And then after a few months off, and we don't know whether there was some issue or not for him to miss the rest of the summer, but probably he was just prepared for the Arc, and he ran an absolute screamer, overdid things, raced a bit freely, too much too soon, and just weakened inside the final furlong. It was a really good run. 13 days later, he bombed out altogether at Ascot, but he's not the first horse to do that. He won't be the last. The run probably came too soon. And here's the thing. On form and ratings, it looks 2 runners who are likely to turn up as well, Adayar and Pyledriver. And Charlie Appleby, at the time of recording, is 10 winners in the last 14 days. He's nudging 33% strike rate. Willie Muir and Chris Grassick have not had a winner in 10 runners. They've yet to get going at all on the flat. And that would be something to bear in mind in the next few weeks to see whether they do manage to get their horses in the right zone and winning races, because stable form on the flat is absolutely massive. I mean, there's some really red hot yards at the minute, and there's some yards who are really struggling, and it's not a statistical coincidence. It is well worth looking out for as a punter.
Now, of course, a little hint there as well, looking at irishracing.com and the cards going into the races. The form of the trainers in the last 21 days is up there on the top right-hand corner. Right, let's move on to the Oaks for the fillies. I noticed, we got the strong review of Vincent Finnegan actually is going for Emily Upjohn as his fancy, but you guys are going for a different take on the Oaks. So Ed, I'll start with you and your take, please.
Oh, no, crikey, I think Emily Upjohn is the right favourite. I mean, I've watched that Musadora back again. I think it gets better the more I watch it, to be honest with you, because she was so keen early doors. I thought she's just going to fall in a hole here. There's no way Frankie's going to be able to keep a lid on her, and yet she's just powered away from the field. Now, you can take the view perhaps they're all rubbish in behind, but either way, I mean, what more do you want her to do? She come from a Sandown novice maiden race, whatever you want to call it, where she bolted up there. She's very light on experience. She was keen. She did everything wrong in the Musadora, and yet has absolutely just wiped the floor with them. I thought it was brilliant. But then, as Stephen said at the top of the show, the fun's all kind of gone out of it now. She's 5-4 to win the Oak. So, and then there's just a load of unknowns in behind, aren't there? We've obviously got Tuesday, who ran a very solid race in the 1,000 guineas. That form looks pretty decent. Obviously, Cachet kind of backed that up to a large extent in France on Sunday when runner-up. And she'll probably head to the Oaks after the 1,000 guineas. And then Nashwa is the kind of the left of field choice in the sense that She won bolted up in a Haydock maiden and then won a listed race at the weekend in very good style. Sounds like now they're going to be tempted to go for the Oaks. So you've got lots of unexposed sorts, as is often the case coming into this. But so essentially I'm gone for one with more experience against them. And that is Concert Hall, who's been my long-term fancy for this, who, I say, didn't really set the world alight as a 2-year-old. But we saw this last season with Snowfall, didn't we? And I'm not saying she's going to be Snowfall, but my point being, she had lots of experience under her about as a 2-year-old and improved as she went up into middle distances and went up in trip as a 3-year-old. Well, she went up to 10 furlongs for the first time, last time out in the South of Bill Stakes, and she had a really willing attitude under Ryan Moore to win on her first start over 10 furlongs. Mixed signals in regards to her pedigree. You know, she's a Derby, which give you a few alarm bells in regards to stamina and staying 12 furlongs, but a dam was, who of course won the Oaks back in 2012. So if she's got anything of her mother's traits, turning up to Epsom and 12 furlongs will be a big tick in the box. Sounds like her and Tuesday are going to run in this weekend's 1,000 guineas, and they both go on to the Oaks in the aftermath, according to Aidan O'Brien. I just think Concert Hall, I think she's definitely worth a shot at this. She's battle hardened, and Epsom, as Stephen touched upon, not always the best horse to win this. There's been a lot of shocks. It's a quirky old track, which could sometimes just undo some of those horses who perhaps have more brilliance, but also with it bring, say, not temperamental issues, but have the ability for it all just to unravel a little bit on the day. I think Concert Hall will be much more, she just does everything unspectacularly, but will kind of do it, if that makes sense. So I think Emily Upjohn, she gets lit up in front of a huge crowd and trumpets blaring, God knows what, and that could be an issue. So Concert Hall will be my each way play. I think the favourite. She deserves to be 5-4 what she's done, because it's a outstanding performance. Just one other thing on Emily Upjohn, I'd just like to touch on. I mean, the ground had a little bit of juice on it by all accounts when she won on her debut at Sandown. I thought it was really interesting to listen to Frankie Dettori's comments and his insight in the aftermath of Emily Upjohn winning the Musadora. He said, in his opinion, the ground was riding much slower than the official description of good. She is a huge filly. I mean, she's built like the old Chaser Denman. I mean, she dwarfs everything in the paddock. Maybe just a sense that some of those big fillies, they do like a bit of give. She's got a bit of a knee action. She does like to kind of plough through the ground as opposed to kind of ping off it. Look, could be clutching its straws there. But she's done both her wins in impressive fashion with a little bit of give underfoot. So if we did get the old Costa del Surrey turns up and it is absolutely rattling around the corner from Stephen's house. You know, Stephen's doing a barbecue. There's brown patches appearing on his perfectly manicured lawn. For Emily Upjohn just around the corner, that might be a little worry if it was proper fast ground at Epsom. But other than that, yeah, Emily Upjohn, I think, is most likely winner, deserves to be favourite. But I think Concert Hall, she's got that battle hardened experience, and she'd be my each way alternative.
Of course, we are looking for anti-post value, but I mean, from what Ed says here, Stephen, I'm sure you're in agreement with most of it. But does that point more towards getting the value on the day of the race itself? So should we be looking at how the market's moving and then try and punt off, perhaps how she's looking in the parade ring and all those kind of things?
Well, I mean, Ed just nailed it, really. I mean, she's now become, her price is far too short, really. She's only had a couple of runs. She virtually bolted for the first furlong. She's inexperienced. She's got no Epsom experience. People will say, well, she's won at Sandown. It's an uphill finish, but it's chalk and cheese. They're rolling round the Canberra at Epsom. I wouldn't take 5-4 anything at Epsom. It's an appalling place to back horses at short prices. You only need to watch the racing there on a regular basis to know luck in running plays a huge part, let alone in a really competitive Group 1 race. So I've looked elsewhere as well, Joan. I quite like Life of Dreams, who's got 5.5 lengths to find with the favourite on their York running. But before that race last week, Charlie Appleby was really strong on Life of Dreams. I know plenty in the yard were on to beat Emily Upjohn, and they were a bit disappointed that she was beaten 5.5 lengths. But she played up beforehand as well. She was reluctant to go in the stalls. So she's obviously got a little bit of temperament. She wasn't brilliantly positioned, and she wandered all over the track. Now, I think she'll definitely appreciate 1 mile 4 rather than 1 mile 2. And the main thing is that having been a very well-backed second favourite at York against Emily Upjohn, she's now going to be probably 20-1. I mean, I see the firms are 12 and 14. And if she got to sort of 20 and you could back her each way and there'll be extra places on the day, I think I'd sooner go down that route. I think she's bound to keep on improving. She was so impressive in her maiden first time out, although that hasn't worked out wonderfully, actually. But I think there's more to come from her. She's trained by a red-hot yard. There's no need to back her now. I'd wait. One thing I'll say, Ed touched upon this. When they interviewed Dettori after that win at York on the favourite, he said that 4 out, he thought they were all in trouble. They were all sort of tired, and the ground was a bit loose, and they were all rolling around. And Emily Upjohn then went again. Well, that's not the sort of thing you want to hear if you're taking 5-4 in a Group 1 on a completely different track on what could be much faster ground potentially. So there's 1,000 5-4 chances every month, aren't there? It's not one that I'd be looking to back personally.
I think that's fair enough. But let's move on now to the Derby, where we've already spoken about last year's winner, Adayar, of course, now going for the Coronation Cup. But yeah, the favourite for the Derby seems to change every other week, it looks like. But Ed, take us through, you were talking off air as well about Desert Crown. Take us what you thought of his performance going into the big one.
Yeah, it was excellent, wasn't it? I mean, we were saying off air that only 10 days ago, or whatever, fortnight ago, we need something to. They were going forward to won the field in the Derby, weren't they? And Luxembourg came out, and it all went really wide open. And who's going to come through? And obviously, Stone Age laid down the marker, winning Leopardstown, and then Desert Crown kind of answered back, didn't he? In no uncertain terms, it was a pretty impressive performance again, wasn't it? To win the Dante, the way it was. I just love those horses that quicken up in a matter of strides. He didn't kind of grind it out. Richard Kingscote asked him to go and win the race, and bang. Suddenly there were 3 lengths on the field before the rest of them even had a thought about it. And then he kind of drifted right, looked a bit quirky, but it's amazing, really. It's one of those great imponderables of racing, isn't it? I'm watching the race live, and I was looking at the betting. You had, was it Al Bodigon, which was James Ferguson's horse. He was a Group 1 winner who'd beaten Stone Age in the Grand Criterium in France, and he was kind of 3-1. And then at one stage you had Desert Crown, who was 3-1 in the same race at York, who'd cover him a Nottingham maiden on soft ground. And it's so hard sometimes to weigh up what you're getting. And wow, that Sir Michael Stout's, how should we say, the hype around the horse was right to the extent of that. He delivered on the track in no uncertain terms. There, to use Steve's phrase, they were going up and down on the spot in behind, and he just quick and clear. And again, he's another one with quirks. So it's which kind of side of the fence do you want to go? Do you want to go with perhaps the horses with more innate natural brilliance but have got their quirkiness, or do you want to go for the more tried and tested battlers who are probably not going to wow you and probably be forgotten about by the end of the season, but on that one day could grind it out? It's a funny one. Again, he has to be favourite on the back of that, or at least between him and Stone Age, they are the right two in the market. I don't think the bookmakers are making any kind of great errors there. I think they're pretty much spot on. But it's a tricky one. I think Desert Crown and the filly won the Moosadora both deserve to be favourites. I think they are the right favourites. You just Epsom, yes, again, you've got a horse who's come from Nottingham Maiden. He's won one race at York, albeit in very good style. I'd imagine, especially the Queen's Jubilee weekend, Epsom is going to be absolute. It's going to be raucous. If you've got any kind of little temperamental issue, it's going to get picked up on. And it could be a really hot day. And yeah, again, it's one of those. Wouldn't shock me if he won, but the kind of the ship sailed in terms of his price. If he wins it 7-4, happy to just say, what 7-4 shot won the Derby. Not to be getting involved in it now. But I think he's a really excited horse. It's great for Sir Michael Stout. To be back in the limelight with a big time. I get it bored of seeing these Godolphin red caps beating the white caps, beating the blue caps, and then O'Brien ninth string beating the third string. Here we go. Sir Michael's back. He's got the favourite. He had his chest puffed out in up on the naves. He was giving it some to all the media, and with Aidan O'Brien in earshot and everything. And so it was brilliant. It's really good to see, and it sets up for a really exciting renewal.
And Stephen, for you looking at the Derby, traditionally, I mean, what does it really take to win, or is it just that hard to pick a kind of a common trend line looking at this race?
Well, it's hard to come up with much original thoughts that won't have been done to a death by the time it comes around. And of course, there is then the randomised nature of Epsom. I mean, thank goodness Desert Crown did win so impressively in the week, because it had begun to look like a really substandard renewal this year with Luxembourg out of the race. He was the big hope of everyone. He's had problems. There was no standout candidate, and Desert Crown has been working extremely well. He was held in the highest regard by Stout, and Stout's landed running this turf season. He's been having plenty of winners, lots of nice young horses, which is great to see. I mean, Desert Crown was very impressive. He ran on strongly when he was asked to. He did wander across the track. That would now be a concern at sort of less than 5-2. An inexperienced horse, never been to Epsom. etc., etc. It's hard to know what the form's worth. I don't think it was a wonderful renewal of the Dante by any stretch of the imagination. And you're going to be up against probably 6 Aidan O'Brien trained horses who are open to improvement as their stamina's drawn out. So Desert Crown, I couldn't dream of backing. I was on the other day last week, but I couldn't dream of backing him now at the current price. The one I quite like, who's another huge drifter after getting beaten, is New London, who's trained by Charlie Apple. I think he's gone out to 25 to 1. I mean, I would be, perhaps they won't go for the Derby now. That would be my one question mark. So maybe hold fire. But I wouldn't hold that defeat at Chester too strongly against him. He was sent off 100 to 30 on, and maybe he didn't have the track. It was soft enough. He got up against an Aidan O'Brien winner who made all the running, got a very good ride, and he didn't look to be making any impression from a long way out. But his previous wins at Newmarket were really impressive, and this stable know the time of day. Perhaps on good fast ground at Epsom, on he remains open to improvement. So I wouldn't totally dismiss him. But we were saying off air, Ed and I, that this has got a look of something winning at 66 to 1 this show. I wouldn't be too at all surprised. It'd be sort of an Aidan O'Brien 9th string in some strange hat combination, ridden by an Irish apprentice you've never heard of. It's got that look to it, the Derby this year. I really don't think there's a standout candidate beyond the favourite, and I'm not totally convinced that he's the next Frankel. So it's an open-looking race.
I mean, that could actually lead to the point that maybe it's actually better for the spectacle, for the sport in general, rather than maybe a betting heat. But
definitely,
Ed,
there'll be a huge field. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah, plenty could go wrong as well for your odds-on favourites. But Ed, let's go on your pick as well. Looking at United Nations, of course, tipped up a couple of weeks ago for us on Jump to It. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, just again looking at some each way value. I mean, it's just worth. I was just looking through the SPs of some of these winners in recent times. I mean, there's been carnage in this race. I mean, last year's winner Adayar wasn't even confirmed to be running until the 5-day stage. We had Serpentine win that absolute bonkers race a couple of seasons ago, didn't we? Where he went off in front as more or less the rag of the field, and they didn't see which way he went. And so yeah, just getting stuck in the short prices, just not for me. And I thought United Nations, he's unflashy. He probably doesn't have the raw ability of a lot of the others in here. But I thought he ground it out well, showed a really good attitude when winning the Lingfield Derby trial. I like the way in which he galloped onto the line. And he's got some Epsom experience as well, don't forget. He ran on his penultimate start. He was really interesting that Ballydoyle shipped him over to give him a sighter at Epsom. So they've clearly had the Derby, or at least, they wanted to get a run in, test the waters with him in regards to Epsom. And he ran pretty well over an inadequate trip on that run at Epsom over short. So he was over 10 furlongs and he was staying on all the way to the line. And then he's come to Lingfield, which if you were not going to run at Epsom, Lingfield would pretty much be the one track you would run at in England, which would replicate a lot of what you're going to get at Epsom, if you see what I'm saying. So he's got a lot of that kind of left-handed camber experience under his belt. I think he's unflashy. He's a bit of a grinder. I think he'd probably, in an ideal world, a little shower or two beforehand just to deaden the ground up a bit and turn it into more of a punch-up rather than a turn of foot kind of brilliance race would probably help him. But he's 14 to 1. I thought I wouldn't be shocked if he ran on into a place. I think he looks all stamina to me. So yeah, it's a race generally. I don't, kind of trip myself up on, trying to get really heavily invested in. It's nice to have to say you've backed the Derby or the Oaks winner, and I do think there are a couple of those in there at bigger prices you can perhaps are slightly overpriced and run their race. But yeah, as you say, it's a real quirky course. If you ever walk like the home straight Epsom, there is a really good photo actually. It might have been when Golden Horn or I can't remember which one it is, but you look up online actually. If you just Google finish line and looking down at Epsom, you will get a real idea of the cambers. If you've got a horse who goes slightly off balance there, you are going to end up in the car park. And you see it time and time again, interference, carnage in running, and sometimes you just need that split or gap at the right time. So yeah, I suppose both of us are taking the mantra of that. If you're on Emily Upjohn or Desert Crown at double figures, well, good luck to you. But I don't think there's a great deal of point in getting involved now. There is always the chance that something else, of course, could come out the woodwork. We've got the Goodwood trials to come and a couple of others. There's the chance something else could spring forward and they'll become the new horse, and those towards the top of the market could drift half a point or two. So yeah, I think we've got the right favourites, but the fun and the value's gone out of them, and yeah, probably look for some each way value against them would be my shout.
Lovely stuff. Well, I think that wraps it up quite nicely, chaps. Of course, stay tuned for upcoming videos here on irishracing.com because we're going in more into depth on the Derby as it gets nearer, as well as plenty of other meetings on the way. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more, and we'll see you again very soon.